Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
So this is the second shiur in this series, but it's the first one in which we'll really talk about the text. So last time we were talking about Rambam's project and the context in which he formulated that project, namely of writing in Hebrew, which was very unusual, a comprehensive code of Jewish law. And we also talked about what is radical about that project and was provocative and led to the work being burnt in 1232. After which, however, it appears to have become universally accepted as an authoritative text, even though many people continue to disagree with its rationalism. And it is a work of, the preeminent work of philosophical Judaism. So what's radical about the project is, first of all, the purpose, secondly, the structure, and thirdly, the content. The purpose and the structure we talked about a little bit last time, we'll get to the content today. The purpose is, first of all, to have a comprehensive codification of the entire Torah Shebaal Peh, entire oral Torah. And although it certainly acknowledges the authority of the Talmud Bavli, it is also meant to make that work as a book unnecessary to consult for most people. Because you don't need to read anything else. You will read Torah Shebechtav, and then you will read my book, and you will know the entire Torah. And that was, I would say, touching the third rail of Jewish religious politics, and displacing the Talmud from its place in the curriculum. The reason for that is twofold. Number one, Talmud Bavli is an extremely difficult or inaccessible work, and it was very difficult. It was a closed book to most people. And to those to whom it was not a closed book, it was their life's occupation. You never got to the end of it. And the Rambam felt that you needed to have a comprehensive understanding of what the Torah really is for two reasons. Number one, so you should know. And number two, so that you would also have time to study philosophy. And as we'll see when we get to that part of the code, that is the culminating part of Talmud Torah, Torah study, the study of philosophy. The structure of the book, the main thing I just want to say is that the first book, which is the one that we're talking about, which is the most controversial one, is very distinctive. Sefer HaMadah, which I translate as the book of cognition. The very idea of including that in a code of halacha at all is quite new. It's similar in some ways, in spirit, to the work of Bachya ibn Pakuda, Duties of the Heart, which was written in Arabic and translated into Hebrew around the same time as the Rambam was writing the code. And similarly, that book has an idea that in addition to the duties of action, we also have duties of thought and contemplation. But what Bachya does not do is to really include it as halacha and to correlate these duties with the 613 mitzvahs of the Torah. And the Rambam is giving us a comprehensive account. It's related to his account of what those 613 mitzvahs are in the Sefer HaMitzvahs, the Book of Commandments, which was written in Arabic. But this book he wrote in Hebrew so that it would be accessible to all Jews throughout the diaspora. And the content is radical, as we will see shortly. So if you're going to correlate all of these different requirements with respect to cognition and thought with commandments, then that imposes certain constraints on how you think about what the requirements are. It's the first item on the handout. Suppose I would say to you, okay, I'm commanding you to believe that there is a particular uninhabited island in the Pacific with 3 turtles on it. Would you be able to follow my command? Could you adopt a belief just because somebody told you to?
No.
Doesn't seem like you could. Now, if I said, I have it on very good evidence that there is such an island, maybe you would take my word for it. But that's not because I command you to do it. It's not based on authority. It's because I'm giving you a reason to believe it. So it would seem as though you can only be commanded to do something that is within your volitional control, the control of your will. And belief is not something that is within the control of your will. Now the Rambam already earlier in his life, in his commentary to the Mishnah, had codified what we know now as the 13 principles of Judaism, but he didn't try to correlate them with commandments. Those are things you're supposed to believe. If he's now going to correlate cognitive acts with commandments, they better be things we can actually do at will. Otherwise you can't say that they're commanded. Okay, so the first section of the book deals with Yesodei HaTorah, foundations of the Torah. So those are going to be foundational cognitive acts, acts of knowledge and thought. But they're also going to have to be commandments. And here we're going to deal with the first three tonight, if we get as far as the first three. First of all, to know that there is a God. So that formulation is very interesting. It's the same verb as a madah, leidah, to know. What exactly that means remains somewhat unclear. It's not just to believe. It couldn't be to believe, because you can't be commanded to believe something. So what is that commanding you to do? The second will be not even to think that there is another God. So that's another cognitive commandment. Not even to allow something to enter into your thoughts. And the third one is to affirm the unity of God. So again, that's going to be a cognitive act that can be commanded. Okay, so let's look at the very beginning then. The first halacha. Rambam says, Yesod ha-yesodos ve'amud ha-chochmas, the basic principle of all basic principles, and the pillar of all the sciences. Leidah, to know or to think. It's right. Madah, as we discussed last time, has a general cognitive connotation. Sheyesh sham matzui rishon, that there is a first being. By the way, you can see already in that formulation the influence of the Arabic language on the Rambam's Hebrew. It is not necessary to say in Hebrew, yesh sham. We say something similar in English. We say there is. He could have just said yesh, but that's exactly what you say in Arabic. So that's interesting. So there are certain sort of Arabisms in his Hebrew, and this is really, I think it's the only work that he composed in Hebrew. And he tried to revive a sort of pure Mishnaic Hebrew that really was not in use until that time, since the time of the Mishnah. V'hu mamtzi kol nimtza, and this first being brought into being every existent thing. V'kol hanimtzaim mishamayim v'aretz, and all of the existing things from the heavens and the earth, shebeinei uma shebeineim, or whatever is between the heavens and the earth, lo nimtzeu ela me'amitas himotzao. They don't exist except from the truth of his existence. Now, the notion of truth here is not really clarified by the Rambam. You'll see that he uses it a few different times. I think it means, in philosophical language, I think the closest thing to it would be the essence or the reality of God's existence. However, he does not say any. Maybe that is his word for it in Hebrew, since he's basically inventing this particular idiom. But it's going to be important that this is not a nature of God that could be grasped by a finite human mind. So there is the truth of God's existence, but it's not the sort of thing like the essence of another being that can actually be understood and grasped. If one were to suppose, which is impossible, but if one were to suppose, shehu eino matzui, that this first being does not exist, ein davar acher yachol lehi matzav, then no other thing would be able to exist. V'im ya'aleh al adah she'ein kol hanimtzeim milvado mitzuyim. But conversely, if you were to suppose that all the other beings did not exist besides God, hu levado yeh matzui, he would still exist. So there's an asymmetry. Right? Without God, nothing else can exist. But without everything else, God can exist alone. V'lo yibatel hu lebitulam, he would not be annulled or non-existent through their non-existence. Shekol hanimtzaim tzrichin lo, all the existent things need him. Hu baruch hu eino tzarich lehem, he doesn't need them. Lo le'echad mehem, not even one of them. Lefikach ein amitaso ka'amitas echad mehem. Therefore, his truth or his reality is not like that of any of them. And he goes on to connect this notion of truth to what the prophet Yirmiyahu says, Hashem Elohim emes, that God is truth. Hu levado ha'emes, he is alone the truth. Ve'ein la'acher emes ka'amitaso, nothing else has truth like his truth. And that's what the Torah means when it says, Ein od milvado, there's no other besides him. Koloma ein sham matsui emes milvado kamoso, which is to say, there is no being besides him that is like him in its truth or its reality. Now, by the way, in later Kabbalistic thought, Ein od milvado will be taken to mean God is the only thing that exists. Nothing else exists besides God. But that's clearly not what the Rambam is saying. He's saying that there's nothing else that has the same sort of power of reality that God has. And I think what's going on here is that there is a philosophical concept which is explicated in the philosophical tradition that the Rambam has received from the Greeks and the Arabs and others, which he is alluding to, but he doesn't want to use the technical term. In particular, from the Arabic and Islamic tradition, the Persian philosopher Ibn Sina, known as Avicenna, had formulated the idea that God is the necessary being. And God is the only necessary being. Everything else is merely contingent. Now, that leaves open the question whether God created all of those other beings at any point in time, the traditional story of creation from nothing, or whether it is the case that God and all the other beings exist throughout all eternity. However, counterfactually, it would still be the case that God alone is necessary and those things depend on God for their existence. And what we're going to see, and here's the radicalism of the content, that Rambam very carefully avoids presupposing creation in any way. One of the big disputes between the Aristotelians and the sort of Islamic, Jewish, and Christian authorities was over this question of creation. From the Aristotelian point of view, the world is eternal. It has always existed as it is. It is dependent on God, but that doesn't mean that God brought it into existence at any particular moment. Now, the Rambam in the Guide of the Perplexed, which he wrote after the Code, argues that there is no demonstrative and certain proof either of creation or of eternity. It's a stalemate. So you might think that therefore he would just start off by saying, well, we're going to assume that God is the creator, because that's the traditional Jewish view, which is exactly what he says in the guide, but for reasons that we'll see, he doesn't do that. In fact, he assumes the eternity of the world, the Aristotelian view, because he thinks that is strategically a better option. Right? If you believe in creation, then of course you believe in a creator. That's easy. And if God is the creator of the entire world, God is not part of the world. God transcends the world, and everything else that the Rambam wants to say about God not being corporeal, right, not having a body, and so on, would follow directly from that. That would be too easy. And then you'd have to say, well, what about all those people who don't believe in creation? They believe in the eternity of the world. How are they going to get to the idea that God exists? So that's why Rambam will start off, as we'll see, with eternity instead of creation, even though he's codifying what Jews have to believe. So that's another part of the radicalism of the book. Right from the outset, he in fact starts by assuming the Aristotelian position and not what he himself calls the Jewish position. So this is all correlated with the first of the 10 commandments. What is the first of the 10 commandments? Is it clear that I am the Lord your God is a commandment? It's not, right? It's not the language of commandment. And in fact, in other accounts, notably the Bahag, the Halachos Gedolos, which is an earlier pre-Maimonidean word, it's not counted as one of the commandments at all. But the Rambam does count it as a commandment, and he understands it to mean that you are commanded to know that God exists. Now, again, you can't be commanded to believe something. Maybe, however, you can be commanded to acquire knowledge. So if there is a proof that God exists, then you are commanded to learn enough logic and enough physics and metaphysics to understand that proof and be convinced by it. That is the first of the 10 commandments as far as Rambam is concerned. So it would appear that every Jew is commanded to understand at least enough philosophy to grasp that. We'll see that there's more involved, even more philosophy involved, but that much you really have to know. The basis for Rambam's understanding is Gemara at the end of Masechet Makos. This is on the handout. Dorish Rabbi Simloi. So Rabbi Simloi expounded. This is the basis for the idea that there are 613 commandments. Sheish meos v'shlosh esrei mitzvahs ne'emru lo l'Moshe. Shalosh meos v'shishim v'chamesh lavin keminyan yimos hachama. So 365 negative precepts corresponding to the number of solar days in the year, or days in the solar year, and 248 positive mitzvahs corresponding to the number of the limbs of a human body. Amar Rav Hamnuna, Maikra. What's the basis for this? Where do you get this idea from, that there are 613? And he cites the pasuk, which is coming up shortly in our liturgical year. Torah tziva lanu Moshe, Morasha, Kehilah Yaakov. So he says, the word Torah is in Gematria, and the value of its letters equal to 611. Well, wait a minute, we wanted 613. How's that going to help? So now we have, Moshe commanded us 611 mitzvahs. What about the other two? So Rav Hamnuna says, Anochi v'lo yelecha mipi hagvura shmanu. That's because the first two of the 10 commandments were not commanded by Moshe. Those the people heard directly from the mouth of the Almighty at Har Sinai. So those were not commanded. So that you get 611 plus 2. Okay, so now if you look on the handout, the second text, this is from the translation of Sefer HaMitzvahs. So Rambam's other work, where he explains where the 613 count comes from. He says the first mitzvah is that we're commanded to know that there is divinity, to know that there is a cause and source of existence who brings all existence into being. The source of this commandment is God's statement, I am the Lord your God. Right, we see that this commandment is included in the total of 613 from the end of the tractate Makos, which we've just read, which says 613 commandments were given to Moses at Sinai. From which verse do we see this? The Torah which was commanded to us by Moses. This indicates the number of mitzvahs which Moses commanded us equals the numerical value of the word Torah. The Gemara then asks, but is this the proper numerical value? It only totals 611. The answer was given. The two commandments, I am the Lord your God and do not have any gods, were heard from the mouth of the Almighty. So it's clear from this passage that I am the Lord your God, i.e. knowledge of God, is counted as one of the 613 mitzvahs. Right, so we have to know this, and the way the Rambam explains this in the Guide of the Perplexed is that to say that the people heard this directly from the voice of God is to say that they understood it by means of their own intellect. They did not need a prophet to reveal it to them. You don't need a prophet to tell you that 2 plus 2 equals 4. And you don't need a prophet to tell you a rational proof. And sometimes divine revelation works through the intellect without the need of prophecy. So that's what it means according to him. So there must be a rational proof that God exists and that no other God exists besides God, that anybody, any human being, not just Jews, can access at any time. Okay, now, he's going to go on and tell you, at least in a very elliptical form, what the proof is. He doesn't go into philosophical detail here. For that, you have to look at the guide. But the basic idea of the proof is one that we can all grasp, he thinks. And again, I note that he does not say anything about God as creator. Right? Yes.
So you're saying that, this is interesting, that the Rambam actually felt that there could be a nevuah through intellect alone, and if that's the case,
yes,
then potentially the Rambam holds himself as a navi, because truthfully,
no, I
could he?
I didn't say there was a nevuah through intellect alone.
But you're saying
no, nevuah requires intellect plus imagination. Whether what role the imagination plays may differ between Moshe and other prophets.
Again,
does not require prophecy.
Acquiring of these two statements.
Yes.
That's nevuah. That's not.
It's not nevuah.
It's not nevuah. So we acquired commandments without nevuah, basically.
Right. The first two, and those are purely rational. So they had the experience. They had the understanding that there is a God and that there is no other God, in a purely rational way at Har Sinai.
So that acquisition was without nevuah.
Correct.
And when we normally say that the mitzvot that were Bnei Israel acquired were through, from God to Moshe,
right,
through nevuah.
That's why this Gemara in Makos is important to him, because 611 were through Moshe. The other two you don't need prophecy for.
So that's that statement alone is very radical in terms of the acquisition of mitzvah.
Yes, it is. So he hints at what Ibn Sina calls the way of the theologians, and that would be a proof from the very idea of God as a necessary being. So that's what I already read out, this idea that there is a first being who does not need any other being, but whom all other beings need. Rambam does not here spell out how you get a proof from that. He does so in the guide, but I think it's at least alluded to. More importantly, though, he does spell out the proof, which comes more directly from Aristotle, although it went through many different evolutions and variations, which Ibn Sina calls the way of the physicists, and that's the proof from motion. So, second page of the handout, and this is the top of page 2 of the text as well. So that's halacha 5. Hamatsui hazeh, this being, hu Elohei ha'olam, is the God of the universe, Adon kol ha'aretz, the Lord of the earth, of all the earth. V'hu hamanhig ha'galgal, v'koach she'ein lo kates v'tachlis. It is he who controls the sphere. So we have to understand what the sphere is, with a power that's without end or limit. V'koach she'ein lo hefsek, a power that is without interruption, it's never intermitted. And here's the proof, right? Shehagalgal sovev tamid, for the sphere is always revolving. V'i efshe sheyisov below masavev. It's impossible that it should revolve without a cause making it revolve. V'hu baruch hu hamasavev oso below yadav below guf. And it's he, God, who makes it revolve without a hand and without a body. Okay, so now in the handout you've got on page 2 a nice little diagram of the Aristotelian cosmos. Right, so you see the earth is at the center. There's air around the earth. There's fire. Then there are spheres on which the celestial bodies move around the earth. Right, nearest to us is the moon. You can see Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. And what is the furthest sphere? Right here. It's the firmament, or the sphere of the fixed stars. The stars that do not appear to be in motion at all from the earth. Right? So that's the furthest out that it goes. So you can explain the motion of all of the internal ones in terms of the further out spheres, but the furthest out of all, the sphere of the firmament, something else beyond the universe is moving that. We see that it's causing everything else to move. Right?
And that would be God.
Yes, that's God. Right. So, but this depends on the idea that Hagalgal Sovev Tamid, the sphere and all the spheres that we see in motion are moving continuously, right? And it's clear that this involves the Aristotelian idea of eternity. The regularity of nature continues without interruption, and it does not appear to have had any beginning or to have any end. Again, contrary to what Rambam himself actually believes, which is the Jewish view. But he explains in the guide why he's going to do it this way. Right, so let's look at the bottom of page 2 of the handout, number 6. So we've explained what it means that the sphere is always revolving. In part 2, chapter 1 of the guide, he says as follows, having given an account of what the various proofs of God's existence are, including the one that we just had a tiny sketch of, it's much more complicated in its full details. All these demonstrative methods of proving the existence of one deity, who is neither a body nor a force in a body, while believing, these all proceed while believing at the same time in the eternity of the world. Right, so all those proofs are given from the point of view of an Aristotelian physicist, not from a Jewish point of view of creation. Right, so the full proof given there relies on the assumption that the motion of the sphere is not only uninterrupted, but eternal. It has no beginning, it has no end. And the reason for that is clear when you see the details of the proof. The argument is that there must be an infinite cause, a cause with infinite power. From that, Rambam will derive that no infinite thing can have a body and so on. But why must there be an infinite cause? Well, because the motion itself is infinite. And it's a principle of Aristotelian physics that when an effect continues to be in motion, in actuality, the cause must also be actual. If the cause were to cease, then the effect would also cease. And since the effect is eternal and infinite, the cause must be eternal and infinite in its own way. So he says very clearly in part 1, chapter 71, why he does not give a proof from creation. So this is C, 6C on my handout. Every argument deemed to be a demonstration of the temporal creation of the world is accompanied by doubts. At this point in the book, he's gone through many of them and says they don't work, and is not a cogent demonstration except among those who do not know the difference between demonstration dialectics and sophistic argument. Right? So he's insulting the various Islamic and Jewish theologians who thought there were proofs. He said, but they don't really understand what logic is, and that's one feature of the Aristotelian revival, that a real emphasis on logic and on understanding just the difference that he mentioned between a really rigorous proof and a bunch of reasons that you give. He says there's no rigorous proof. The utmost power of one who adheres to a law and who has acquired knowledge of true reality consists, in my opinion, in his refuting the proofs of the philosophers bearing on the eternity of the world. In other words, if you believe in creation, the best you can do is to refute proof of eternity. You cannot rigorously prove creation. Right? So that's what he does in the book. He tries to show that neither side can demonstratively and certainly prove its point. There's a stalemate. Now, if this is the state of the question, right, if you can't prove it rigorously either way, how can we take the doctrine of the temporal creation of the world as a premise upon which we found the existence of the deity? Right? A lot of people are just going to say, well, I don't accept that premise, so... And it's going to look as though the Jewish faith is based on something that runs contrary to physics, because physics assumes the eternity of the world. Right? For in that case, the existence of the deity would be doubtful. One would have to say that if the world were created in time, there would be a deity. And if it were eternal, there would be no deity in existence. Right? That's the danger that you would run. It would sound like you were saying, there's only a God for those who believe in creation. That's not an acceptable situation. Things either would be like that, or we would claim that we have a demonstration of the creation of the world in time, and we would use the sword to prove it, so that we should claim to know God by means of a demonstration. And that's a very interesting expression. In other words, we would say we have a proof, but we don't really have one, and we'd have to resort to coercion. And remember, as I said last time, Rambam lived through some very difficult times. The Almohad insurgency against the caliphate involved forcing everybody by the sword to convert to Islam. That's a poor excuse for demonstration in the Rambam's view. He says, we don't want to be in that situation. Every human being should believe in God's existence because it's rational, not because you're forcing them to do it with a sword. All this is remote from truth. For according to me, the correct way, which is the method of demonstration about which there can be no doubt, is to establish the existence and the oneness of the deity and the negation of corporeality through the methods of the philosophers, which methods are founded upon the eternity of the world. You can see, even though he doesn't mention the code here, that's what he did in the halacha that I just read out. This is not because I believe in the eternity of the world, or because I concede this point to the philosophers, but because it is through this method that the demonstration becomes valid and perfect certainty is obtained with regard to those three things. I mean, the existence of the deity, his oneness, and his not being a body, and all this without making a judgment upon the world's being eternal or created in time. Right? So I'm not going to get into the difficult question, he says, which is actually incapable of resolution, whether the world is eternal or creation. That's a matter of faith. I want to talk only about things that can be rigorously demonstrated. So if you're going to, again, if you were to believe in creation, you obviously already believe in God. You don't need to talk to those people. You're preaching to the choir. The people you need to convince are the ones who believe in eternity. And that's why the proof that he mentions in the code is the proof based on the eternity of the world, even though that's not the Jewish view. So you can already see why, in terms of content, this is once again very controversial, since the idea that philosophy and physics in particular were committed to eternity and opposed to creation was one of the things that both the Muslims and the Jews, and soon after the Rambam's death, the Christians would object to. Okay.
Where's the Judaism in this?
Where's the Judaism?
There's no Judaism.
There isn't any Judaism in it. And that's the point of saying that they heard it mipi hagvura, directly from God, i.e. by means of their reason. So that's something any human being can do. So there shouldn't be any Judaism in the first commandment.
How come he put this in a halachic text? He feels that this is a foundation for halacha.
Yeah.
Does he see that?
Right. Now he could have said something else, like in the halachas gedolos. Presumably it's not that he doesn't think we should believe in God, it's that it's not a mitzvah. It's a kind of faith that's presupposed.
Right.
But the Rambam doesn't go that route.
Animamen. It's something you have to
Yes,
believe.
but that's not Rambam's formulation. No. That's somebody else's formulation. It's not. He would not say you have to believe it. You have to know it.
You have to know it.
You have to know it on the basis of reason, and therefore we'll have to adopt even the premises of our opponents in order to show that even they have to believe it, and that's the best proof you can have. But yeah, you're right. There's no Judaism in the first commandment. Now, there is an alternative approach to this whole question, which you can already see in the Ramban, Nachmanides. So he's 2 generations or so after Rambam. He's born 1194, before the Rambam passed away in 1204. And he wrote Hasagos or animadversions on the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvahs. So he often disagrees with Rambam, and he's doing this in the spirit, I would say, of the Rabbad of Poskier. We talked about him last time as the first critic of the Rambam, and he wrote Hasagot on the Mishnah Torah. The Ramban wrote them on Sefer HaMitzvahs. So Ramban says, this is on my handout 7a, this belief commanded in this utterance, that is Anochi Hashem Elokecha, is neither wondrous nor distant. In other words, you shouldn't really have to learn logic, physics, and metaphysics at all to grasp the first commandment. He thinks that's asking too much. That can't be what the first commandment was. It is explicit in the words of Chazal that it is acceptance of his sovereignty, namely belief in his lordship. Now, notice that the Ramban does follow the Rambam, and this is very typical, even of those who oppose Rambam later on. Right? He follows him to some extent. He says, you're right, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am the Lord your God, is a commandment. And if it's a commandment, it has to be telling you to do a volitional act. So it can't be just faith in God. It has to be something else. It must be the active acceptance of God's sovereignty. Kabbalas ol malchus shamayim. Let's see, Rambam has a different account of that. But the Rambam hasn't said anything about that yet. Right? Ramban says that's what it is. And he develops this more in his commentary to the Chumash, when he talks about the first commandment in Exodus Shmos 20, pasuk base, second pasuk. I am the Lord your God. This utterance is a positive commandment. So again, notice he's following Rambam there. And elsewhere he discusses the other approaches. I mentioned the Halachos Gedolos doesn't think it's a commandment at all. So Ramban notes that, but he goes with Rambam. He just disagrees about the content of the commandment. He said, I am the Lord, teaching and commanding them that they should know and believe that there is Hashem and that he is a God to them. This means that there is a primordial being from whom came everything by means of desire and power. And he is a God to them, that is, they are obliged to worship. And he said, and notice this is something we haven't mentioned yet in Rambam's account, right? It goes on to say, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, Asher Hotzeisicha me'eretz Mitzrayim, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. It's not clear why that goes together with Rambam's rational proof, right? What does this historical fact got to do with the rational proof? But Ramban has an account of it. He says, because his taking them out from there teaches his existence and desire. For they went out from there by knowledge and providence. And it also teaches creation, Ramban says. Right? See how he's opposing Rambam's view. He thinks Anochi Hashem Elokecha includes belief in creation, because on the assumption of the eternity of the world, a thing would not vary from its nature. Right? Everything would just go along according to natural law, and God would not intervene. But God did intervene, took us out of Egypt. So that shows that God is in charge. And if God is in charge, then God must be the creator and not merely the one who's responsible for existence of everything. And it teaches power, and power teaches unity, as he says above, so that you should know that there's none like me in all the earth. And this is the meaning of Asher Hotzeisicha, who took you out. But they are the knowers and the witnesses of all this, meaning the Israelites who were actually taken out. And the meaning of from the house of slaves, mi beis avodim, is that they were standing in Egypt in the house of slaves, captives to Pharaoh, and he, God, said to them that the reason why they are obliged that Hashem, the great, honored, and awesome, should be their God, that they should serve him, is because he redeemed them from slavery in Egypt. It's like the meaning of they are my servants whom I took out of the land of Egypt. And this mitzvah is called, in the words of our rabbis in the Gemara and Brachos, Kabbalas Ol Malchus Shemayim, the acceptance of the yoke of the sovereignty of heaven. So notice that this is, again, this is why everything has to start with understanding Rambam, right? Ramban is differing from Rambam in the content of that first mitzvah, but he's following him in an awful lot as well. In particular, he's following him in saying, Anochi Hashem Elokecha is a commandment. But for him, it is a commandment that is based on the experience, the historical experience that the Bnei Yisrael had of being taken out of the house of bondage in Egypt. It's not a rational proof and shouldn't be required that you have to do all that work. Okay, so that is...
So you qualify it as a historical proof. You qualify it as, at least the Ramban, as a historical
It's a historical experience, is what it's based on, yes. So the Rambam will have his own explanation of why it says, who took you out of Egypt, and no doubt it is to show that God, who is the cause of all existence, is also involved in Jewish history. It's one and the same God. But God's taking us out of Egypt is not the reason to believe in God. And that would not, in fact, give you sufficient evidence to believe in a transcendent God who has infinite power. If you were just basing on a historical experience, from Rambam's point of view, that would prove that there's a very powerful being who does some special things, but it wouldn't prove that it's God. Right? That requires something much stronger. And for him, that will be the rotation of the spheres.
And the creation itself, creation of the world, is also reference to an existing condition that had happened before.
Creation of the world would be the God's existing without anything, and then God's bringing everything else into being.
So the first pasuk in Bereshit is reference to something that had already...
Yes, there are no witnesses for that of necessity. And Rambam shows in the guide that although it cannot be proved that it didn't happen, it also cannot be proven that it did happen. So although he says, I'm committed to this, and there would be various difficult consequences if it turned out, if somebody gave reasons why it's not the case, Nevertheless, it can't be proven rationally. So that has Judaism in it. Belief in creation is a Jewish belief, but the first commandment is a human belief. That there is a God who controls and is the cause of the regularity of nature. Okay, so the second mitzvah, which I'm not going to say much about, but we already mentioned, is you shouldn't even entertain the possibility of there being more than one God. Notice that is also a cognitive act. Rambam does not understand the second commandment to forbid idolatry. We'll talk about idolatry later in another class, but this is about thought for him. You shouldn't even think that there's more than one power. And again, he can prove that on the basis of the idea that there's an infinitely powerful being who's responsible for the regularity of nature in its eternity. And there couldn't be two infinitely powerful beings. That doesn't make sense. Because one would interact with the other and would create a limit to its power. So that can't be. So from the idea of infinity, you get the idea of one idea of unity, at least of uniqueness. So I think sort of...
But by extension, if you do,
Yeah.
then that is idolatry.
If you
That
do
is
think
a-
yes. So idolatry
So it is
but it's not worship. It's not avodah zarah. It's not a foreign worship. So into
thought.
at the root of idolatry is a sin of thought.
Right, so that is the sin of thought.
Now, uniqueness is only one aspect of the unity of God. So the next mitzvah that Rambam wants to talk about is to affirm God's unity. And I think it's important to distinguish a few different senses. And the verse that he sees as the source for this is Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. So I'm curious to know what people think of when they say Shema Yisrael. But Rambam has a very particular philosophical thought in mind. So again, you might have a more historical or messianic understanding of that pasuk, and that's what Rashi says on the pasuk, which is probably familiar, which is that now Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem is our God, but eventually Hashem Echad, Hashem is going to be the only God for the whole world. The Rambam certainly doesn't deny that and would share in this hope, but that's not his approach to the pasuk at all. And I think this is interesting because the conception of the unity of God that Rambam goes on to give is actually a very ancient one. We find it amongst the ancient Greek Jewish philosophers such as Philo of Alexandria, but they don't really have a good scriptural basis for it. They don't really have a good pasuk. And Rambam really thinks you're commanded to believe in this philosophical notion on the basis of the verse in Shema. So this is the seventh halacha. Elo hazeh echad hu. This God is one. Ve'eno shnayim v'lo yesar shnayim. He's not two and he's not more than two. El echad, but one. Okay, so far that would appear to mean unity as uniqueness. So, for example, we might say there's one and only one Kehilah of Riverdale. It's unique. There's nothing else like it. But that is a merely contingent fact. I mean, there could be more than one thing fitting the same description. And clearly that can't but be what we mean about God. It must be something more than that. It's not just uniqueness. Right? So Rambam wants to go far beyond that. He wants to say that there is nothing in the universe, none of the units in the universe, the achadim, which exist, because everything is a unit in some sense, right? But they cannot have a unity like God's unity. So this unity must be something special. Lo echad kamin shu kolel achadim harbe. He's not one like a species that contains many units or individuals or subspecies. Right? That's not what we mean. And sometimes that's called a universal. So it's not like the idea of the color red, where there can be many different sorts of red, there can be many different individual instances of red. Each one of those is a unit. In some sense, there's only one color red, but there are also many things that are read in virtue of it. That's not what we mean by the unity of God. Right? And he's not one in the way that a body is, which can be divided into different parts and dimensions. So here we get a second notion, besides uniqueness, a second notion of unity, simplicity. Right? There are two different versions of that, I think. This is 3b in my handout. So you might distinguish between relative and absolute simplicity. X is relatively simple if it has no parts that are themselves x's. But maybe it has parts. Maybe you could divide it up. And X is absolutely simple if it has no proper parts at all from which it is composed. Right? So now, that leaves open the possibility that X, again, could be divisible, but maybe the parts are posterior to the whole rather than prior to the whole. Right? So then I think Rambam wants to add to simplicity indivisibility, like an atom on the ancient view. An atom cannot be divided at all. Yes, Rutherford split the atom, but the original idea of the atom is that it's the most basic element of unit of matter, and it can't be divided at all. Right? So now we've got uniqueness, absolute simplicity, and indivisibility. It's an even stronger notion of unity. But I think Rambam's notion of unity goes even beyond that as well, because so far you can imagine that there's just one atom, so that would be unique, simple, and indivisible. But that's not what God is either, right? I think the key term really is infinite. And that was implicit in what Rambam said before in his proof, that because the Galgal Sovev Tamid, the sphere rotates constantly, there must be a power which is without tachlis v'kates. It's got no limit or end. So implicit in that is the notion that God is a being with infinite power. And the term the Kabbalists will use, taken from the philosophers, is Ein Sof. Right? There's no limit, infinite. Saying that's what the word infinite means, in being a negative prefix. So I think ultimately the idea of unity here is not just uniqueness, not just simplicity, not just indivisibility, but infinity. Right? So the infinite on this conception is unique, and it's unique necessarily, not just because there happened to be only one of that kind of thing. It's not composed of any other things either, not because it's simple like an atom, but because if it did have constituents, they would have to have a determinate number, and that would be a limitation to the infinite. That's impossible. There can't be any limitations. So the infinite is one in the strongest possible sense. And there can only be one infinite on this conception. Now, I'm not saying anything here about the mathematical infinity. If you have to study set theory and transfinite numbers, as I had to, there's a different notion of infinity in mathematics in these days. But this notion of infinity is a metaphysical notion of infinity, and it applies only to God. And from this, Rambam derives that God is not a body in any sense, because any body is limited. Right? He says, this is in the middle of the seventh halacha. If you look in the English, it's about halfway down. If the Creator were a physical body, he would have bounds and limits, for it is impossible for a physical body to be without limits, and where a body is limited and finite, its energy is also limited and finite. And remember, that wouldn't work in the proof that we gave, and this is what he goes on to note. And our God, blessed be his name, since his power is infinite and unceasing, for the sphere is continually revolving, Hagalgal Sovev Tamid, his power is not the energy of a physical body. And since he is not a physical body, the accidents that happen to physical bodies, not accidents in the sense of the kind of thing that take you to the emergency room, but accidents in the sense of properties that pertain to a thing not in virtue of its essence, but in virtue of something else. That's what an accident is in metaphysics. The accidents that a physical body can have couldn't possibly apply to God, so as to distinguish him from another being. That's how we distinguish one physical body from another. They're all made of matter, so in that sense they're all the same, but each one has different accidental properties. But that's not what God is like. Right? God does not have accidental properties. Hence, it is impossible that he can be anything but one. V'yedias davar zeh, and the knowledge or realization of this matter, mitzvahs aseh, is a positive mitzvah. Shneimar, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That's what the Shema means. Right? So that is the third commandment which he talks about here. And again, it's got a distinctively philosophical content because it's rooted in the proof that Rambam gave from the eternal regularity of nature. But I also note that, this is number 4 on the handout, in Sefer HaMitzvahs, he does say that this belief in unity, obviously if it's a commandment, it can't be just to believe, right? So it must be to acquire the belief through a process of proof or something like that, and in particular to affirm that unity. And he says that this is the mitzvah of malchus, of kingship. And he uses the language from the Gemara in Brachos of Kabbalas Ol Malchus Shemayim, accepting the yoke of the kingdom of heaven. But that means to him accepting this notion of the infinite as one in a very special sense. It's not really a very political notion of sovereignty. And I'll end with this, but again, the Ramban, Nachmanides, takes a different approach. Now, if you look at the Ramban's commentary to Sefer Devarim, to the book of Deuteronomy, he has a general approach, which he outlines at the beginning, that Devarim is a repetition of things that have already been said. It's also called Mishnah Torah, just like the Rambam's code. So when things are stated in Devarim, they must be either a biur, an explication of a mitzvah that was given earlier, or in those cases where something is added, which does happen, Ramban says this is what he calls mitzvahs mechudashos. These are new or renewed mitzvahs. They were already given to Moshe earlier, but he's only telling them to the people now because they're directly relevant to settling in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel. Right? So that's his general approach. So now we know that the pasuk of Shema Yisrael comes in Devarim. So the Ramban is going to take this approach to Shema Yisrael. Right? So he says, Gam bazeh mitzvah sheyivaer. This is a mitzvah that is explicated. It's a biur. The mitzvah must have been given earlier. It's not something new. Moshe is repeating it. Why? How was it given earlier? He says because because unity was already implicit in the first of the 10 commandments. So he's got a different count from the Rambam. Right? Rambam counts these as 2 different mitzvahs, existence and unity. Ramban says everything was involved already in the first of the 10 commandments, both existence and unity. In fact, he has a general view, which is already stated by Philo of Alexandria as well, that all of the 613 mitzvahs can be derived from the 10 commandments. And he has a treatise, which I'm going to cite in a minute, where he tries to work that out. So, from his point of view, then, Shema Yisrael is the reaffirmation of the unity that we were already commanded to affirm in the first of the 10 commandments. It's not a separate one, as Rambam held. And in his treatise on the 613 commandments derived from the 10 commandments at Sinai, he says as follows: the first mitzvah is a positive mitzvah that obligates a person to inquire, to investigate, to seek, and to acknowledge his lordship and to know him. And we find that it is a positive mitzvah. You shall know this day and lay it to your heart. And to this, I am the Lord your God alludes, for knowledge is the foundation and root of every matter. Again, although Ramban is taking a different approach from Rambam, he follows him in a great deal. Knowledge is very important to Ramban. It's not knowledge based on reason, however. Who brought you forth from the land of Egypt alludes that everybody is obliged to unify his name. But that redemption was not by means of an emissary, a shaliach, whether angel or seraph, but the Holy One, blessed be he, went himself and in his presence. Therefore, a person needs to know that with respect to unifying the name, he is one and not two. As it says, Ein od milvado, there's no other beside him. To unify him by means of the 10 sfirot in the infinite. And that's the Kabbalistic notion that God has many aspects, which can all be understood under the 10 headings of the spheres. but God is at the same time infinite and one. God has many aspects, but is one. This is a Kabbalistic view. Behold, in this verse, allusion is made to three mitzvahs: to know Him, to unify Him, and to love. And all three are said in Kriyas Shema. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And love is a positive mitzvah, as it says, Yahavtas Hashem Elokecha. It follows directly from that. We'll start with Rambam's view of love of God next time. For Kabbalists like the Ramban, the mitzvah is not only cognitive, it's also active. God's unity is not complete and perfect as long as this world is not complete and perfect. So our job is not merely to cognize and affirm the unity of God, but to help perfect it. On Rambam's view, God doesn't need any help from us. God is already perfectly one, and our job is entirely cognitive. So that's the first three mitzvahs according to the Rambam, with some outline of the Ramban's alternative approach. And we've seen that the content of the Rambam's view is already highly philosophical and really is meant for all human beings so far. Okay.
Yeshikoah. Thank you.
So